Stop scrolling. I'm about to show you 4 weapons, ancient instruments of power that Machiavelli studied in Renaissance Italy. Each weapon represents a different path to dominance, a different strategy for survival, a different mask you wear when everything is on the line. Weapon 1. The Golden Scepter, ornate, jeweled, representing authority through legitimacy. Weapon 2. The Silver Dagger, concealed, sharp, representing power through precision. Weapon 3. The Iron Sword, brutal, heavy, representing dominance through force. Weapon 4. The Poisoned Chalice, elegant, deadly, representing control through deception. Choose one. Right now. Don't analyze it. Don't overthink it. Your instinct is telling you something about how you conquer, how you survive, how you eliminate threats. Comment your choice. 1, 2, 3, or 4. Do it before I reveal what it means, because what I'm about to show you will change how you see every power dynamic in your life. In 1513, Niccolò Machiavelli was imprisoned and tortured by the Medici family. They accused him of conspiracy. They wanted names. They wanted confessions. But Machiavelli didn't break. Instead, he observed. He watched how different prisoners responded to torture, how some begged for mercy, how others threatened retaliation, how some negotiated, how some stayed silent. And he realized something the torturers themselves didn't understand. Each prisoner's response revealed their natural weapon, their instinctive strategy for wielding power. Some tried to invoke authority even while chained, the scepter strategy. Some waited for the perfect moment to strike, the dagger strategy. Some endured through pure will, the sword strategy. Some manipulated their interrogators with lies, the chalice strategy. After his release, Machiavelli coded these 4 weapon archetypes into the prince. He never named them explicitly, but they appear in every chapter, every case study, every strategic lesson. Today, I'm decoding his weapon system for you. Comment on your weapon choice now, because once you understand which weapon you instinctively reach for, you can never unsee how you operate. And more importantly, you'll see who's wielding your counter-weapon right now. Let me take you back to Renaissance Italy, 1502. Machiavelli was sent as a diplomatic envoy to meet Cesare Borgia, the most feared commander in Italy, the son of Pope Alexander VI, the man who conquered the Romagna through a combination of brutality, cunning, and political genius. Machiavelli spent weeks observing Borgia, watching how he made decisions, how he dealt with allies and enemies, how he responded to threats, and he noticed something extraordinary. Borgia didn't use one strategy. He used all 4 weapon archetypes, but he had a primary weapon that defined his approach. When Borgia needed to consolidate power legitimately, he invoked his father's papal authority, the scepter. When Borgia needed to eliminate a specific threat, he struck with surgical precision, the dagger. When Borgia needed to intimidate rivals, he demonstrated overwhelming military force, the sword. When Borgia needed to neutralize conspiracies, he poisoned his enemies' alliances with false information, the chalice. But his primary weapon, his instinctive default, was the dagger. Precision violence, calculated assassination, strategic elimination of key targets. Machiavelli documented this in Chapter 7 of The Prince, describing how Borgia hired Ramiro de Orco to pacify the Romagna through terror, and then had Ramiro himself executed in the public square, cut in half to redirect the people's hatred. That's dagger strategy. Remove the problem, then remove the weapon. Leave no trace of your hand in the violence. But here's what Machiavelli discovered that most scholars miss. Your primary weapon determines your vulnerability. Borgia's precision made him dependent on timing. When his father died unexpectedly and Borgia was too sick to act, his dagger strategy collapsed. He couldn't adapt fast enough. Within months, he lost everything, not because he was weak, but because his weapon had a weakness. Every weapon does. The question is, do you know which weakness you're carrying into every battle? 400 years after Machiavelli wrote The Prince, Carl Jung would describe archetypes as unconscious patterns that shape behavior. But Jung focused on personality, on psychology, on the self. Machiavelli focused on strategy, on power, on survival. Your weapon archetype isn't about who you are. It's about how you kill. Not literally, though sometimes literally, but metaphorically, professionally, socially, politically. How do you eliminate obstacles? How do you neutralize threats? How do you remove the people standing between you and what you want? That's your weapon, and you chose it instinctively at the start of this video. Now let me reveal what your choice means. We'll analyze each weapon, each strategy, each strength, each fatal flaw. If you chose weapon 1, pay close attention to the first section. If you chose 2, 3, or 4, stay for all of them. Because understanding all 4 weapons means you can identify which weapon your enemies are using against you right now. And once you identify their weapon, you can disarm it. Let's begin with the first archetype, Weapon 1, the Golden Scepter. If you chose the Golden Scepter, you wield power through institutional authority. You don't conquer through violence. You don't manipulate through deception. You don't hide in shadows. You legitimize yourself. Your instinct when facing a threat is to invoke structure. Rules, systems, hierarchies, organizations that grant you positional power. This isn't weakness, it's strategy. Because institutional authority is the most sustainable form of power. It outlasts individual strength. It survives personal relationships. It transfers across generations. Machiavelli wrote about the scepter archetype in Chapter 9 of The Prince, when discussing how princes can rule through the support of the people, or the support of the nobles. He who attains the principality through the favor of the nobles maintains himself with more difficulty than he who becomes prince by the favor of the people. In other words, popular authority is more stable than elite authority, but both are forms of scepter power, legitimacy through institutional backing. Pope Julius II was a scepter strategist. When Julius wanted to expand papal control over central Italy, he didn't hire mercenaries like other Renaissance leaders. He didn't poison rivals like the Borgias. He didn't negotiate like the Medici. He invoked the authority of the Church. He declared that certain territories were rightfully part of the Papal States. He excommunicated anyone who resisted. He framed his military campaigns as holy wars defending Christendom. And because he wielded the scepter, institutional religious authority, other rulers couldn't simply kill him without triggering a continent-wide crisis. The scepter protected him better than any army. In modern terms, you're the executive who always follows proper channels, the manager who documents everything, the leader who builds authority through titles, certifications, official recognition. When someone challenges you, you don't fight them personally. You invoke the system. You file the complaint. You cite the policy. You appeal to the board. You leverage your institutional position. Your strength is durability. Scepter power survives personal attacks because it's not personal. It's structural. You can be criticized, undermined, even temporarily removed, but as long as the institution remains, you can reclaim your position. But here's the fatal flaw Machiavelli identified in the scepter archetype. And this is what will destroy you if you don't adapt. Institutional authority requires institutional stability. The moment the system collapses, your weapon evaporates. Pope Julius II died in 1513. His institutional power died with him. Within a decade, Martin Luther challenged papal authority, and the Protestant Reformation shattered the Catholic Church's monopoly on religious legitimacy. The scepter only works when people still believe in the institution it represents. Machiavelli himself was a scepter strategist in his early career. He served as second chancellor of the Republic of Florence. His authority came from his institutional position. When the Medici family returned to power in 1512 and dissolved the Republican government, Machiavelli's scepter disintegrated instantly. All his authority, all his access, all his influence, gone. Because it was never personal. It was always positional. And when the position disappeared, so did he. They tortured him not because he was dangerous, but because his position made him suspect. And once they confirmed he had no personal power base, they released him into exile. If you are a scepter wielder, your survival depends on building personal power alongside institutional authority. Don't just hold the position. Make yourself indispensable beyond the position. Don't just follow the system. Become the person who understands the system better than anyone else, so that even if your title changes, your expertise remains valuable. Machiavelli's corrective strategy appears in Chapter 6. It must be remembered that there is nothing more difficult to plan, more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to manage than a new system. For the initiator has the enmity of all who would profit by the preservation of the old institution. Translation: if you're going to rely on institutions, you must either control the institution or be prepared to build a new one when the old one fails. The scepter is powerful, but it's only as powerful as the throne it represents. Make sure you have a second weapon hidden beneath your robes. If you chose weapon 1, if you instinctively gravitated toward institutional authority, toward legitimate power, toward structural dominance, then comment below. I wield the scepter. Claim your weapon. Because understanding that you fight through systems means you can weaponize bureaucracy instead of becoming its victim. Weapon 2. The Silver Dagger. If you chose the Silver Dagger, you wield power through precision elimination. You don't build institutions. You don't command armies. You don't manipulate masses. You identify the critical target, and you remove it. Your instinct when facing a threat is surgical. You don't fight the entire organization. You don't challenge the whole system. You find the one person, the one relationship, the one decision point that holds everything together, and you cut it. This is the weapon of assassins. Not literal assassins, though sometimes literal assassins, but strategic assassins. People who understand that complex systems have single points of failure. Remove the right person at the right moment, and empires collapse. Machiavelli documented dagger strategy most explicitly in Chapter 7 of The Prince, describing Cesare Borgia's method of consolidating the Romagna. He placed Ramiro de Orco, a swift and cruel man, in command with the fullest power. In a short time, Ramiro reduced the province to peace and unity with the greatest success. Then the Duke, judging such excessive authority to be no longer necessary, established a civil court in the center of the province with an excellent president. And one morning, Ramiro's body was found cut in two in the piazza, with a piece of wood and a bloody knife beside him. This is pure dagger strategy. Borgia used Ramiro to pacify the region through terror, then killed Ramiro to eliminate the source of the people's hatred. One precise cut that solved multiple problems simultaneously. The angry citizens had their scapegoat. Borgia appeared merciful by removing the tyrant, and no one could trace the execution order back to Borgia himself. One target, one blade, total strategic transformation. In Renaissance Italy, the dagger wasn't just a weapon. It was a political statement. Poisoned blades, hidden assassins, bodies found in the Tiber. The Pazzi conspiracy of 1478 was a dagger operation. The plan? Kill Lorenzo de' Medici and his brother Giuliano during Easter Mass in Florence Cathedral. With both Medici brothers dead, the Pazzi family could seize control of Florence. The assassination was meticulously planned. Trained killers positioned throughout the cathedral. Weapons concealed beneath robes. The attack synchronized to occur during the most sacred moment of the Mass, when no one would expect violence. They killed Giuliano. 19 stab wounds. He died instantly. But Lorenzo survived. He escaped through the sacristy with only minor injuries. And because the dagger strategy failed to eliminate the primary target, the entire conspiracy collapsed. Within hours, the Pazzi family was destroyed, their properties confiscated, their members executed, their name erased from Florentine politics. That's the dagger's weakness. Precision requires perfect execution. One mistake, one survival, one miscalculation, and the entire strategy fails. In modern terms, you're the executive who fires the one problematic director whose removal fixes the entire department. The lawyer who targets the single precedent case that undermines the opposition's argument. The entrepreneur who acquires the one key employee from a competitor, crippling their advantage. You don't fight big battles. You fight small battles that have disproportionate consequences. Your strength is efficiency. While others are mobilizing armies and building coalitions, you've already solved the problem with one decisive action. But here's the fatal flaw. Machiavelli identified in the dagger archetype. Precision creates predictability. Once people recognize you as a dagger strategist, they defend their critical targets obsessively. Cesare Borgia's downfall began when his enemies started protecting themselves specifically against dagger attacks. They traveled with bodyguards. They tested their food. They trusted no one. Borgia's weapon became useless the moment it became recognized. If you are a dagger wielder, your survival depends on tactical unpredictability. You cannot always use the same weapon. You must occasionally demonstrate other capabilities: institutional authority, overwhelming force, mass manipulation, so that enemies can't simply defend against your signature move. The most dangerous dagger strategists are the ones who strike precisely once, achieve total victory, and then appear to use completely different strategies for years. People defend against patterns. If you only strike once per decade, there's no pattern to defend against. Machiavelli's advice for dagger wielders appears in Chapter 8. Injuries ought to be done all at one time, so that being tasted less, they offend less. Benefits ought to be given little by little, so that the flavor of them may last longer. Translation: when you use the dagger, use it completely. Eliminate every connected threat simultaneously. Don't wound, kill. Don't injure, annihilate. And then never use it again unless absolutely necessary. If you chose Weapon 2, if you instinctively gravitated toward precision, toward surgical elimination, toward identifying and removing critical targets, then comment below. I wield the dagger. Claim your weapon. Because understanding that you fight through precision means you can strike decisively instead of dying from hesitation. Weapon 3, the Iron Sword. If you chose the Iron Sword, you wield power through overwhelming force. You don't negotiate, You don't manipulate. You don't hide. You dominate. Your instinct when facing a threat is direct confrontation. You don't eliminate the leader and hope the organization collapses. You don't invoke institutional authority. You don't wait for the perfect moment. You bring superior force to bear and you crush the opposition completely. This is the weapon of conquerors. Not subtle conquerors. Not political conquerors. Military conquerors. People who understand that sometimes the only solution is total victory achieved through undeniable strength. Machiavelli analyzed sword strategy throughout The Prince, but his clearest statement appears in Chapter 12. The main foundations of every state are good laws and good arms, and because there cannot be good laws where the state is not well armed, it follows that where they are well armed, they have good laws. This is sword doctrine. Authority derives from force. Everything else, laws, institutions, legitimacy, rests on the foundation of military capability. If you can't defend your position through strength, you don't actually hold that position. Francesco Sforza embodied the sword archetype perfectly. Sforza wasn't born into nobility. He had no institutional authority. He had no hereditary claim to power. But he had an army. He served as a mercenary commander, a condottiero, fighting for whoever paid him. Milan, Venice, Florence. He switched sides based on strategic advantage, not loyalty. In 1450, Milan's government collapsed. The nobles couldn't agree on a successor. The city descended into chaos. Sforza didn't negotiate a settlement. He didn't invoke legal claims. He didn't manipulate factions against each other. He laid siege to Milan with his army. He starved the city until they surrendered. And then he declared himself duke. No coronation, no papal blessing, no institutional legitimacy, just force, just the sword, and it worked. Sforza ruled Milan successfully for 16 years. His descendants held power for another generation. Why? Because once you conquer something with overwhelming force, people accept the reality of power. Might doesn't make right philosophically, but it makes effective rule practically. In modern terms, you're the CEO who conducts hostile takeovers, the executive who doesn't ask for permission or consensus. You override objections with decision authority. The leader who fires the entire opposing faction in one brutal restructuring. You solve problems through superior capability deployed without hesitation. Your strength is decisiveness. While others are negotiating and strategizing, you've already won through direct action. Sword wielders don't get paralyzed by analysis. They assess the situation, commit overwhelming resources, and execute. But here's the fatal flaw Machiavelli identified in the sword archetype. Force is expensive, and enemies are infinite. Francesco Sforza conquered Milan, but maintaining control required a permanent army. That army required constant payment. Payment required taxation. Taxation created resentment. Resentment created conspiracies. Sforza spent his entire reign fighting rebellions, external threats, and internal opposition, because he had conquered through force rather than legitimacy. The sword wins battles quickly, but it creates wars that never end. Genghis Khan conquered the largest contiguous land empire in human history through pure sword strategy, overwhelming cavalry forces, total warfare, complete destruction of any city that resisted. But the Mongol Empire fragmented within 2 generations because it was held together entirely by force. When the force weakened, the empire shattered. If you are a sword wielder, your survival depends on converting conquest into legitimacy. You cannot rule through force forever. Eventually, you must transform military victory into institutional acceptance. This is what Augustus Caesar understood and what Julius Caesar missed. Julius conquered, Augustus consolidated. Julius wielded the sword openly. Augustus hid the sword behind the facade of restored republican institutions. Machiavelli's corrective advice for sword wielders appears in Chapter 14. A prince ought to have no other aim or thought, nor select anything else for his study than war and its rules and discipline. This is the sole art that belongs to him who rules. But then, critically, in Chapter 19, a prince must avoid those things which make him hated and despised. When he has avoided this, he has fulfilled his part. Translation: maintain the capacity for overwhelming force. Be known for that capacity. But don't deploy it constantly. The most effective sword wielders are the ones who demonstrate their capability decisively once, and then rarely need to use it again because everyone remembers what happened last time. If you chose Weapon 3, if you instinctively gravitated toward direct confrontation, toward overwhelming strength, toward crushing opposition through superior force, then comment below, "I wield the sword." Claim your weapon. Because understanding that you fight through power means you can demonstrate strength without exhausting it. Weapon 4, the Poisoned Chalice. If you chose the Poisoned Chalice, you wield power through strategic deception. You don't command armies. You don't build institutions. You don't assassinate key targets. You corrupt systems from within. Your instinct when facing a threat is to make the threat destroy itself. You don't attack directly. You don't need to. You poison the relationships, the information, the trust that holds your enemy's position together, and then you watch them collapse without ever revealing your hand. This is the weapon of spy masters, of propagandists, of those who understand that perception is more powerful than reality, and that controlling perception means controlling outcomes without ever being identified as the controller. Machiavelli never explicitly named the chalice strategy in The Prince, because to do so would violate its fundamental principle. Deception only works when the deceived don't know they're being deceived, but he understood it. In Chapter 18, Machiavelli wrote the most famous passage about deception in political philosophy. Therefore, it is unnecessary for a prince to have all the good qualities I have enumerated, but it is very necessary to appear to have them. And I shall dare to say this also, that to have them and always to observe them is injurious, and that to appear to have them is useful. This is chalice doctrine. Reality and appearance are separate battlefields. Control appearance and reality becomes irrelevant. Let others fight over territory, titles, and treasure. You'll fight over what people believe about territory, titles, and treasure. And belief determines everything. Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, was the supreme chalice strategist of Renaissance Italy. When Rodrigo wanted to become pope in 1492, he didn't have the votes. The College of Cardinals was divided among several candidates, none of whom had majority support. Rodrigo didn't campaign on merit. He didn't invoke religious authority. He didn't threaten anyone. He bribed them, systematically, privately, promises of wealth, positions, benefices for their families. But more importantly, he made each cardinal believe that every other cardinal was about to accept his offer. He created the perception of inevitability. By the time the conclave voted, most cardinals believed Rodrigo's election was already decided. So they voted for him to be on the winning side of the inevitable outcome. Rodrigo Borgia became pope through pure perception management. He poisoned the information environment so effectively that his opponents defeated themselves by accepting the reality he manufactured. That's chalice strategy at its highest level. As Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo continued using the chalice. When he wanted to legitimize his illegitimate son Cesare as a military commander, he didn't simply appoint him. He created an elaborate fiction about Cesare's qualifications, forged documents, strategic rumors, carefully staged military victories against negligible opponents. By the time Cesare took real command, everyone believed he was already a proven military genius, so they treated him like one, which became self-fulfilling. In modern terms, you're the executive who leaks strategic misinformation to competitors, the politician who plants stories that reshape public perception, the entrepreneur who engineers the appearance of success until it becomes actual success. You don't fight battles. You make battles unnecessary by controlling what people believe about the battlefield. Your strength is invisibility. Chalice wielders can't be defeated because they're never identified as the threat. While others are attacking visible enemies and building obvious defenses, you're reshaping the foundations of reality itself, and no one realizes it's happening until it's already complete. But here's the fatal flaw Machiavelli identified in the chalice archetype: deception compounds, and eventually you lose track of the truth yourself. Pope Alexander VI died in 1503, possibly from malaria, possibly from accidental poisoning during a plot to poison someone else. The irony is perfect. The man who wielded the poisoned chalice his entire career may have died from his own weapon. Cesare Borgia, who inherited his father's chalice strategy, collapsed immediately after Alexander's death. Why? Because Cesare's entire power base was built on manufactured perception. Without his father's institutional position and deception apparatus, the illusion evaporated. Within months, every lie was exposed, every false alliance revealed, every fabricated victory acknowledged as staged. Cesare went from master of Italy to imprisoned exile, because his power was never real. It was always perception, and perception without foundation is just postponed failure. If you are a chalice wielder, your survival depends on anchoring deception to reality. You cannot build an empire entirely on lies. Eventually, the structure must have some genuine foundation, real capability, real relationships, real value. The most dangerous chalice strategists are the ones who use deception tactically, not existentially. They lie about specific things to achieve specific advantages, but their core position rests on something true. Because when everything is false, the first person to expose any lie brings down the entire house of cards. Machiavelli's warning to chalice wielders appears in chapter 18. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. But when these few find you different from what is universally believed, they will not dare oppose the opinion of the many. Translation: mass deception is powerful, but it only works if the small number of people who know the truth can't successfully reveal it. You must either make the truth unbelievable, so outrageous that no one would accept it, even if exposed, or make the truth-knowers complicit in maintaining the deception. If you chose weapon 4, if you instinctively gravitated toward manipulation, toward controlling perception, toward making others destroy themselves, then comment below, "I wield the chalice." Claim your weapon. Because understanding that you fight through deception means you can weaponize truth when lies become liabilities. The weapon counter cycle. You now know your Machiavellian weapon: the scepter, the dagger, the sword, the chalice. But here's what Machiavelli coded into the prince that scholars still debate. Every weapon has a counter-weapon. The scepter fears the sword, direct force that destroys institutions. The sword fears the dagger, precision that bypasses strength. The dagger fears the chalice, deception that protects targets. The chalice fears the scepter, legitimacy that exposes lies. This is the strategic cycle that governs all power conflicts. Why did Pope Julius II survive when other popes fell? Because he was a scepter wielder who recognized the sword threat. So he built his own army instead of relying purely on institutional authority. Why did Cesare Borgia ultimately fail? Because he was a dagger wielder attacked by chalice strategies. His enemies spread false information about his capabilities and intentions, making his precise strikes ineffective. Why did Francesco Sforza rule successfully despite conquering through force? Because he was a sword wielder who legitimized himself institutionally. He married into Milanese nobility and obtained recognition from other Italian powers. Why did Pope Alexander VI die suddenly after decades of survival? Because he was a chalice wielder who lost his scepter protection. When his papal authority weakened, his deceptions became vulnerable to exposure. Understanding your weapon is essential. Understanding your vulnerability to the counterweapon is survival. If you wield the scepter, your power is institutional legitimacy. Your weakness is direct force that destroys institutions. Your defense: build personal military capability or alliances with sword wielders. If you wield the dagger, your power is precision elimination. Your weakness is deception that protects targets or creates false targets. Your defense: verify information independently. Trust nothing, confirm everything. If you wield the sword, your power is overwhelming force. Your weakness is precision strikes that bypass your strength. Your defense: eliminate potential dagger threats preemptively through constant surveillance. If you wield the chalice, your power is strategic deception. Your weakness is institutional authority that exposes lies through formal investigation. Your defense: never antagonize scepter wielders directly. Manipulate around them. Machiavelli lived through every permutation of this cycle. He served scepter leaders who were destroyed by sword invasions. He documented dagger operations that failed due to chalice counterintelligence. He advised sword commanders who fell to dagger assassinations. He watched chalice manipulators get exposed by scepter investigations. Every weapon can be defeated. Every strategy has a counter-strategy. The question is, do you know which weapon is pointed at you right now? The final challenge. Comment your weapon one more time. I wield the scepter. I wield the dagger. I wield the sword. I wield the chalice. Claim your weapon. Because this isn't a personality assessment. This is a tactical diagnostic. Machiavelli wrote The Prince to teach rulers how to identify threats and neutralize them before those threats become fatal. I'm decoding his weapon system to teach you the same survival strategy. Like this video if you loved it and subscribe to this channel. Because in the next video, I'm revealing the advanced technique Machiavelli used personally. How to wield all 4 weapons simultaneously without losing your core identity. The scepter-dagger hybrid that built empires. The sword-chalice combination that conquered invisibly. The fluid weapon mastery that made Machiavelli the most dangerous political theorist in history, despite never holding permanent power himself. Machiavelli didn't just study weapons, he became the armory. And in the next video, I'll show you how to do the same. Until then, study your weapon, identify your counter-weapon, and remember, in the game of power, the weapon you choose determines whether you conquer or die. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. Choose your appearance carefully, because appearance is a weapon too. I'll see you in the next revelation.